Namaste. This is Yoga Therapy Podcast, and I'm your host, Shira, yoga teacher, yoga therapist, and Ayurvedic wellness educator. In these conversations with experts in the field of yoga therapy, you'll find out what it is and how it can help you and your loved ones to reclaim well-being. We'll touch on physical as well as mental health, physiology, emotions, women's health, spiritual well-being, goddesses, and self-development in the fullest sense. Listening to another story can change ours, so thank you for showing up, and let's begin this journey together. So hello everyone, today we are joined by this amazing woman who I just found out has traveled the world and lived in Australia like me, and her name is Joanne Spence. She is a slow movement maven, a certified yoga therapist and life force practitioner too. She's trauma informed and trauma sensitive. She has credentials in clinical social work and is on the board of Yoga in Schools in America, Pennsylvania. So thank you for being here, Joanne, and it's a real pleasure to meet you.
You too, and I'm just so happy to be here and meet a fellow Aussie.
Yes, even though I try really hard to hide my accent, it's really difficult, isn't it? So tell us about you and your story, how you got to yoga and how it developed into yoga therapy.
Yes, well, I like to say that I was in pain for long enough and that I was desperate enough to try even yoga. Because I think that there's a perception of what yoga is and what it isn't. So I realized that after being in a car accident in my 30s, which was 20 plus years ago, and I was in pain for 2 years that became chronic pain. And I was very fortunate in that I had good health care and I had access when you're in an emergency situation. It's nothing like having the resources to be whisked away to an emergency room and to have all the best that Western medicine has to offer. And I'm really grateful for that. But at the same time, when that becomes chronic, I think that Western medicine, I call it allopathic medicine, has less to offer us. And all of the things that were broken were mended. But at that 2-year point, I was not doing very well. But I looked just fine. But I had, by that time, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. And my background in clinical social work, I realized I think I'm depressed. And I went to my doctor one day as a follow-up and thinking things aren't going so well. And he said, I'm just going to congratulate you that you've made such a great recovery from this awful accident. And I just burst into tears. And it was kind of one of those defining moments of realizing that something was going on, that I'd shifted from that I was sick of being sick and I wasn't getting well. I was depressed. And so it was the beginning of saying something out loud. Whether we've been in an accident or whether depression has got a root cause in something else, it was that moment of being able to say, I think that this is happening to me. And I think also people in the healthcare profession sometimes have a hard time being able to say, oh yeah, I am anxious or I am depressed. And what can I do that would resource me as I am on my own wellness journey? So that was the beginning of my journey into how to be better, how to be well when I was in chronic pain. And yoga became a really important part of that story because I was going to exercise my way to health. And by God, I was going to get better. But when you don't, there's a piece of the discouragement and probably contributing factors to the depression and not sleeping well. And so I was working at a really nice, fancy health and wellness facility, and I was teaching water aerobics. And that was only because I was there every day of the week and they were short of teachers. And they were like, well, you could teach this class. And I'm like, I don't know anything about water aerobics, but okay. And I learned and I had the practice, and that was certainly a really good start. But it was in that environment of working in this lovely health facility, think fancy gym, that yoga was just starting to get on the radar. I'm not talking yoga studios. This was 2000, and I was offered to this fancy wellness facility said, we will pay for you to become a yoga instructor. I'm like, great, what's that? And I went to this weekend workshop, which I now go, but what it was a really good start. It's not enough to be a yoga teacher, but it was a start. But what that did for me in that weekend, because I didn't have any idea what yoga was, I had an introduction to an understanding of yoga, at least hearing the word out loud. But it was really hard, and I was surprised. I wasn't interested in stretching my body, and I thought I was really fit, and it turns out that I wasn't so maybe as fit as I thought. And as I struggled through the weekend trying to make sense of what it was that I was learning, there was a shift happening in my body. But the drama was 3 days later, I woke up and I was pain-free for the first time in 2 years. And I thought, oh, I wonder, is it the yoga? And so that was what it was, I think. And that was what set me on a path to find out more, to learn more, to open a few yoga studios, to start a nonprofit
Wow.
that we called Yoga in School. So that was where the journey
Okay.
began.
Okay. Yeah. Beautiful. And I imagine you realized quite quickly that just yoga wasn't the healing factor, that you needed to understand it therapeutically.
I wanted to understand so badly what was going on, but I was also pretty busy with
Mm.
raising my family. My
Kids.
children were
Yeah.
really young. And when I started feeling better, my husband and I were like, it's now or never, because we thought we would have a larger family, but with my illness lasting so long, we thought, well, maybe we're just lucky we have 2 children.
Yeah.
That we would look around and think, nah, there's probably room for some more here. And we got pregnant right away,
Oh,
fortunately.
wow.
But as soon as I got pregnant, some of my it sort of triggered things
Of
from
course.
the
The
chronic pain.
hormones. Yeah.
And we thought, well, maybe this is it, the third child. And that turned out to be true. And we just rejoiced that we could have another child. And I don't know that my body was capable of being able to carry another pregnancy. So I felt really joyous that we could have this third child. So I was in this space of that's a very busy parenting time in life to have 3 children under 5 and under 6. And it was like, well, whatever's going on here, it doesn't matter to me if I can't explain the neuroscience like I feel like I've studied now. But it was, how can I help other people have this experience of whatever it was? And what would that mean? What would I need to do in order to do that? So the therapeutic part came much, much later. What
Okay.
I understood was business, because I was, been an entrepreneur for a long time. I
Okay.
understood real estate.
Oh, wow.
And so I rented a space and started teaching what I had been learning in my, I think being a good teacher, part of that is teaching what you know. So I didn't teach
Yeah.
much, but I did teach what I knew.
Mm-hmm.
And part of me was,
And passionately, I'm
initially,
sure.
yes, well, yeah, a lot of enthusiasm, but I
Yeah.
taught in, I don't know, the basement of this health facility in the dark with the lights off because
Wow.
heaven forbid I might open my eyes and see what was in front of me. That was terrifying to think of. I might see somebody with a wonky posture, and I wouldn't know what to do because I had so
So you
little
did it in the
training.
dark. That's
Because
funny.
I wanted to reduce, I mean, I understood the reducing of the senses, the pratyahara part of the practice, and so I was just doing what I knew in my own nervous system. And it turns out there's a lot to that. Now we understand a
Mm.
little more about the vagus nerve and co-regulation through polyvagal theory and things that I write
Mm.
about now, but I didn't know that then.
No. And so it's
Know
just
that.
intuitive. You kind of teach
I
what you
think so.
felt and experienced.
And I understood the desperation and the frustration
Mm.
of being at the limit of what Western medicine could offer me, and that
Mm.
my ongoing path was limited. And I wanted to open that up, particularly for women with young children that I saw struggling. And
Yeah.
that's because that was my experience and story. And it turns out
Yeah.
that there is a lot more people struggling than just women with young children.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. But for me, that was the same experience. Having a child really exhausted me and brought up so much history that I didn't know was there. It really made me look into the psychology and the family of origin of my family and really deep dive into all my self-sabotage and everything that was holding me back and keeping me small. Yeah, it brings up a lot being pregnant and those hormones.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. But it was also interesting having the experience of being pregnant, having pregnancies before I did and discovered yoga, and a
And
pregnancy
after.
after,
Mm.
and just the environment, if that's the right word, of my body's capability and my ability to feel like I had more inner resources.
Mm.
Um, Even though I was older by that time, I think I was 37 or 38 by the time I had my third pregnancy. The that experience, I just felt was so much healthier. And not that I had any, it was low risk pregnancies with the first two, but I felt this strength in my body that I had not felt and known before. And I'm deeply grateful that, and it was probably there all along, but I think yoga
Mm.
is also a revealing practice to help us see who we are and
Mm.
to appreciate this complex and strong yet fragile
Adaptable
bodies
system.
that
Yeah.
we live in. And
Yeah.
Ayurveda, as you have studied, it helps us to see
Understand.
it and
Yeah.
to be aware of it, to feel it, to love it, to accept
Mm.
it. And I had to do a lot of work to get into that radical acceptance and that self-love piece that,
Mm.
um, even though I had tried to affirm my way to health, that I needed I needed a bigger toolkit.
Yeah. 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 I remember being pregnant. I was 35 as well, and I'd already been practicing for 20 years. So I was very sensitive. And I remember watching a film and seeing what was going on, and I was like, oh my God, I could be giving birth to that. And you are giving birth to a whole new universe. That child comes into the world with their fantasy and their ideas and their personality, and they're going to create a whole new bubble of life. And yeah, like you say, the sensitivity. I mean, you could have experienced that with the first two children, but you just weren't sensitive or aware enough. And I think that's another gift of yoga, is that sensitivity to really feel the nuances and layers of being.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. I remember my midwife saying to me, we were able to have a home birth for our third child, and it was maybe 2 hours after my youngest was born,
Uh-huh.
and she said, Whatever you've been doing, you should keep doing it, because right now I'm looking at, she's looking at me and all of my sensitive areas, and she said, I can't tell that you have just given birth
Wow.
because everything has returned to what it looked like pre-birth. And I often don't see this in such a short period of time. And I was like, oh, okay, this is,
A
and
physical sign.
I a physical sign, and but um, I felt good in myself. I felt the strength of my body and doing what women have done for
Centuries or
millennia,
millennia.
of being
Yeah.
able, millennia, to be able to give birth without drug. And I'm not
Mm,
anti-drug by any means, but just that this was my, I'm not a sporty person, but this
mm,
was my elite athletic training that I felt like I was inherently preparing myself for.
mm.
And I would never be an Olympiad, or in the vein of elite athletes. But in that moment of thinking, I did that. And look, my body's perfectly capable of that. And that was
Mm.
a really, it was something that I will carry with me as, yeah, I did that. And I want other women to feel that too.
Yeah, it's empowering, very empowering. Yeah. You're bringing a life into the world. It's the most powerful thing there is. Yeah. Okay. So, can you tell listeners what for you is the difference between yoga and yoga therapy? What makes the two different?
Yeah, I was called a yoga therapist before there was such a designation, or before there was certifications. And I think that was probably because my first career was social work. And so I was a therapist in the sense of being a counselor and a clinical practitioner. And in my journey of being a yoga teacher, I had a job, a part-time job at a mental health facility, an inpatient psychiatric hospital. And I was running therapeutic yoga groups for people in the acute phase of mental illness, because I, again, sort of intuitively knew, and there was just a little bit of research at that point, because this was in the early 2000s, um, about the impact of movement and breath on anxiety and depression. But I had a very feisty boss who paved a way for me to enter into that world. But it was probably because of that therapeutic bent I had already in my training as a social worker. But what I learned in that space, that there was a way to apply yoga that was very specific to mental health, and particularly anxiety and depression, and that some things increase our energy and some things decrease our energy. And over time, I came to understand that there was a really specialized knowledge that has later evolved into the path, one of the paths of yoga therapy, because some people specialize in musculoskeletal work, other people specialize in mental health. I put myself in that category, except that they're intertwined, intimately intertwined. But there's only one lifetime to learn all these things. So I see yoga therapy usually as a smaller group or individual work that usually involves evaluating. It has an intake piece that involves evaluation of an individual, that leaves them with a practice that's customized for them. And I think that's distinguishing. Is I don't do that in my group classes, even though my group classes have a therapeutic bent. We need more time and often more information to be able to do something that is catered just for you and your particular situation and what you would like to focus on. So that was probably a lot of words, but I came to that journey because of my time, 10 years working inpatient psychiatric and gaining more training and knowledge along the way. And that's really become my focus of working with individuals and having them, creating a customized practice for them to do based on what they're asking for.
This I read on your website, and you just talked about it now, how they're so intertwined, the physical, physiological, and mental health, and that we can't actually distinguish them and separate them. So to be well, to heal and be pain-free physically and mentally, we need to move. So tell us why that's so important and what it does physiologically and the effects it has on our hormones, mood, and energy, if you would like to go into that.
So how long do we have? How many minutes?
Oh, we can go all day.
Wonderful. Let's do it. Yeah, I will get my soapbox out. Well, I think first of all, if we go that evolution there, in evolution that we were made to move,
Yeah.
and that most of our day over the centuries and the millennia was about moving and hunting and gathering and we've
Digging and
just been on this
climbing. Yeah.
and we've just been on this continuum to the 21st century of where that's less and less necessary for our survival and for eating and sleeping and all for our survival, because we have different ways of achieving that. And with that, there's been some great developments of things that make our lives better. And at the same time, I think the decrease in the sedentary activity, and I know you've talked about this with other people as well. This decrease in an increase in screen time and sitting and our work being revolving around screens for many people has led people to forget this part of them that was developed to move every day, many times a day. And I find at times, I think the research is probably every 20 minutes, you need to be getting up and moving, standing, looking out to the horizon, even some small 30 seconds. But I'm flat out getting, let's see, I'll try and get people to commit to at least every hour getting up from the computer. Even just the act of standing, you get a 6% glucose spike and your brain runs on glucose and oxygen. So just doing that, you're doing yourself a favor. And I sometimes have to set myself a timer or a sticky note that I will see, because we can all put things in front of us that we won't even see over time. Just some sort of reminder that works for you, that allows for you to do that, because your body needs it, your brain needs it. And it's such a small thing, but it's so easy to forget. So I write about that. I try and practice that. I make practices simple and accessible so people can do them from their chair or just from a simple standing up, and starting to notice that they're breathing and then link their breath and their movement together. Even the simplicity of inhaling, raising the arms up, and exhaling, bringing the hands to the heart center. Now, you don't need to link breath and movement to allow for that movement to happen, but I think it's one of yoga's defining features that distinguishes it from any old exercise, is that we pay attention to that in our yoga practice. We pay attention to the breath as we move. And after a while, we understand that the breath can help us to move. And there's ways that if we restrict the breath, like if we hold the breath and try and twist the spine, we can still do it. But if we twist on the exhale, and we'll do a little bit of this practice soon. But if we do that, we'll notice that there is more ability. We're resourcing the body when we twist on that exhale that actually allows the body to be able to twist more functionally. And discovering that for myself and then teaching that and have people come alive in their body instead of kind of all bound up and holding on to tension that, I mean, we need some tension in the body, but holding on to tension that's not serving you in this moment. And just seeing people free from those tensions that really can bind us up and constrict the body. That's just been a real gift. And it begins with this understanding of the body's need for movement and paying attention to the breath, as silly and as simple as that sounds, that it pays huge dividends to have this awareness, and that in itself is life-changing. So maybe I'll get off my soapbox right here, as that would be my sort of entry point into practice.
Well, we can do that. We can go straight into practice if you would like. Hang on, I do have a few questions, but I can ask them afterwards. Do you prefer that?
No, let's do that now.
Okay. So I read, I think, it doesn't matter where I read it. Yoga reduces limbic arousal and increases emotional management of expression. How does it do that? So that's something you'd written. I would like just for listeners to understand.
That sounds good. That sounds really good.
Yeah.
Where did I write that? Yeah, so I think when we understand just some really entry level things about the autonomic nervous system, and most people have heard of fight and flight and rest and digest. Well, the more technical terms would be sympathetic arousal, the sympathetic nervous system, fight and flight, and the rest and digest. And that's where yoga can really help us to move. It's not that one is good and one is bad, because we want blends of both.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes if we've gotten stuck in the stress, in the sympathetic arousal state, because we're angry or we're sad or somebody cut us off in traffic or yelled at us, if we don't come down from that, evolutionary animals in the wild would shake that off. And there's some really interesting things that you can Google, like possums and shaking, and being able to see how the dissipation of the hormones that cause that arousal, that of the cortisol and the adrenaline, it's come through movement. And what do? We sit there, we get tense, we
hold it,
get tension, we hold it, we hold the breath. And instead, being able to learn that we can actually, Steve Porges talks about this in polyvagal theory, that the breath is a direct access to the nervous system. And yoga teaches us a lot about the breath and how we can use it, manipulate it, train it. I'm talking about it like it's something independent from the brain and the body, and of course it isn't. It isn't. Yeah. But when we notice that tension and that limbic arousal, then we can then use the breath and start to allow ourselves to move back into parasympathetic. And that even though that this is an automatic reaction, that over time we become aware, we can train ourselves to have this ability to bring ourselves back into parasympathetic activation that allows us to become. And yoga has a lot to say about moving between those states and what it means to move between the two, and to and this is a part of yoga that I think is less well known, to
Mm-hmm.
increase our tolerance for being able to be in sympathetic arousal, because sometimes that we need to. We want our survival instinct intact so that if there is real danger and not just perceived danger in front of us, that we can mobilize and get ourselves out of that situation or stand our ground and fight whatever would be appropriate. So yoga helps us to do that, and we can access that directly through the breath, but not necessarily in the moment of crisis. We need to have practice over time, repetition of practice over time, of some very simple exercises, practices that allow us to um, form a little library within ourselves, or I call it the tool belt, where you have different pockets on your tool belt. And some of those pockets might be things that are calming, that would take you into parasympathetic. Some of those things are energizing, that take you into sympathetic arousal. And then those practices that are a little bit of each, or maybe balancing, that could be in your middle pocket. And just, I use that image consistently, just as a way, as people are practicing, they can think about their practice for later retrieval when the stakes are high and they really need the practice. When we can, in the context of having a wonderful conversation in the midst of a podcast on a Monday morning, that we can go, I'm pretty even right now, so let's practice that while the stakes are nice and low, and I'm not feeling like the bear is chasing me in the
Yeah,
forest.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. I also try and keep repeating to people how important practice is, in the sense that we cultivate it to the point. It's like walking through a jungle, and you clear the road, you clear the pathway, and the more you walk on that path, the easier it is to get to that state. So you want to get to that state very quickly. So when there is this stressful event, you can come back to homeostasis much quicker than if you've never practiced, or practiced once or twice. Yeah. So,
That's a wonderful metaphor.
yeah, and that's why that's why yoga is a practice. You have to keep practicing, even if you're 100. It doesn't matter. You still have to keep doing it. Yeah. Yeah. So you're
Because we're humans and not machines.
no, exactly. Thank God. Not yet. I'm a little worried. Your style of yoga, so it helps anxiety, depression, insomnia, chronic pain, trauma, ADHD. And what is it particularly that promotes this mental health aspect? Is it only the polyvagal theory? Is it only this vagal tone and activation of the vagus nerve? Or you think there's also other aspects?
Well, I guess it depends what lens you want to look through.
Okay.
There are many, and you could come at this from yoga philosophy of the Yoga Sutras, and that the second sutra of the reducing the fluctuations of the mind, and that
Mm,
our yoga practice is about steadiness and ease, and finding a sweetness of homeostasis. I love the way you use that word. And so that's one way to look at that, through this philosophical system that yoga brings, that's really worth looking at, the 8 limbs of yoga, of learning about the yamas and the niyamas, and ahimsa, this act of non-violence, and how can we apply that to ourselves. And then
mm,
there's some people find that a harder entry point. For me, it was like, oh, this is really interesting. I want to learn more, though I learned that after I already had a practice.
mm,
Uh, I became interested in this science just because I'm curious, but I became interested also because I was raising money for yoga programs in schools, or
mm,
having to justify um, the salary I was being paid in institutions that are research and evidence based. And so understanding some science on what's happening, I won't say I didn't care how it worked, just that it does work, because there's that sounds just kind of shallow, but when your life has gone from unmanageable to manageable,
Mm,
and there's some specific steps that you took along the way, that it's like,
that's
wow, it's all
proof.
good. But being so somewhat my felt experience, and I had to turn that into words that worked in academia and worked
Mm,
into the research. So I had to scoop up words like phenomenological reflection that's my first person felt experience of
mm,
what has happened to me, and is that duplicatable. And I saw time and time again that that it
mm,
was. And when I started learning about the autonomic nervous system, and that we're up against the fitness world and exercise, and I've had a foot in that world for many years, and I'm very active myself, and was a aerobics fitness instructor for years and years, and had that certification. So I spoke that language and understood it. But what I also understood was that there was a workout of my nervous system that was happening when I transitioned more to gentle yoga into restorative yoga.
mm.
It was a huge and difficult transition from a faster athletic practice to a slower, gentle practice. But that's what I guess has kept me and wooed me all of these years, 20 years into teaching, as being the sticking and the staying point of where I'm willing to hang my hat
Mm.
from here until I have breath left in me. And that's because of what was happening inside. And we can explain that through things like the vagus nerve and polyvagal theory, and this wandering nerve that goes all through the body. That yoga is actually a yoga practice, and our breath work can help to tone our vagus nerve, whether or not you know that your vagus nerve is there and needs toned. But the research on that, so vagus nerve, heart rate variability, these are uh, things that have are able to be measured in the world of where people want measurable biomarkers and not just first person felt experience, even though I think that that's on par. And so understanding some basic things about the nervous system, things like the vagus nerve, knowing a little bit about the hormones and the reduction of cortisol in the body from a slower a yoga practice that reduces the stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, and that there's you're being able to use some of the language of neuroscience, and I think is really helpful without being reductionist. There's always the risk of being reductionist of the practice, but it's also the pragmatics of being able to bring programming that foundations and endowments can fund to people that may not be able to do that for themselves, like yoga in schools, like working with middle schoolers in after school programs, like working with veterans. So these being able to have an understanding of the nervous system and how these things are being impacted by gentle and restorative yoga has made the difference between me being able to work with populations of people that I've really been called to, like children in the juvenile justice system, like veterans in the with PTSD, or veterans in the community, or working in a psychiatric hospital, having some understanding of something that goes beyond the yoga philosophy. But I suspect that the yoga philosophy, um, it's now, science is catching up with what the ancients knew all along. And however they knew that, I don't know how they knew it. Now we have some more words to explain that from a scientific rationale. And I'm really grateful that to be able to use that lens to the service of being able to open the practice to all that want, and to be able to say, this is not a practice for white, bendy, rich people. This is a practice for anybody that wants it.
Yeah.
And if you can breathe and you want to delve more into this path of wellness, it is for you. And let me show you how.
Yeah. It's so important to make it accessible to anyone and everyone and healthy. Yeah. So that's how you wrote your book. That's the reason, because I didn't say this in the introduction, but Joanne has written a book called Trauma Informed Yoga. And is that why you wrote that book, basically? Yeah.
It was accessibility, and I narrowed it to writing it to therapists that do talk therapy, because that was my first career was as a counselor. I wanted people that didn't have an opportunity to go study the amount of time that it took me to study, that there were some really essential parts of yoga that could be used in talk therapy. Because if we understand that trauma is stored in the body and that not everything can be talked out, and people like Bessel van der Kolk say this in his groundbreaking work, The Body Keeps the Score,
Yeah.
that yoga and body-based therapies has something very important to offer, because people get stuck, therapists get stuck in the process of trying to talk through
Problems
things that we don't have words for.
Yeah.
And yoga has a lot to offer in that aspect. And I try to stick to very simple things, so simple that some people might think,
how's
what?
this
You're
gonna
not
work?
really doing much of anything.
Yeah.
But it is, as I said, using the words of working out the nervous system. And eventually that, I mean, I see immediate change in people, but it's also slow medicine. And over time, you will feel these things more and more. And I think having simple language, making the practices accessible, and that so people can feel success quickly, that's incentive to keep doing some more.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. I'm so glad you wrote the book. I haven't read it yet. I just quickly breezed through this morning. Anything else? No, there's nothing else that I wanted to ask. So we can do your practice if you would like. Or do you want to add anything? Do you feel like we've missed something? Well, we've missed a lot, but
I think we've covered lots of ground. I think we've
okay.
covered plenty of ground, and
Okay.
I'm grateful for that.
Okay, wonderful. I'll just mute myself. You can go ahead.
So let's take a moment and maybe just over the next 5 or 6 minutes, we're going to do something that I find has been really powerful. And I start with a little chime that I open most of my, even short sessions, I open with the sound of the chime. And what we're doing is creating an environment where we can connect, even through sound, but we're listening to the sound of the chime. And we're also noticing how we're breathing. So let's just do that for a moment as we listen and we breathe. And feel free to have your eyes open or closed, whichever feels more comfortable to you in this moment. Notice how you're breathing. No need to change it. You're just noticing. You're breathing through your nose. Are you noticing the movement of your lungs or your ribs? Noticing your feet on the floor, the bottom on the chair or the floor, wherever you're sitting. We're going to link our breath to our movement. So a simple example would be inhaling, taking the hands and sweeping them up over the head, and then exhale, bringing them to the heart center. I'm going to do that again. You're going to inhale, sweeping the arms up overhead. Exhale to the heart center. And one more. Inhale, sweeping the arms up. Exhale, bringing the hands to the heart center. So we're going to take a moment. We're going to try something called stair step breathing. And we're going to inhale 4 little rapid inhales through the nose until you get a full capacity of air. So it's a, and then we pause at the top of the breath, and you've got full capacity, and we're going to exhale down slowly, like the breath is coming down an elevator. So inhaling little stair steps, pausing, and then exhale. So just get the mechanics of that for a moment. So pausing and then slowing it down as you exhale, both through the nose. So let's try that together. We're going to try that 3 times on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Pause. Exhale down. And again, inhale. Pause. Slowly exhale. Last one. Inhale. Pause. Slowly exhale. Just let your breathing go back to whatever's typical for you, just a regular in and out breath. And just take a moment sensing into your right hand, sensing into your left hand, sensing into your right foot, sensing into your left foot. Taking a moment to notice how you're feeling. And if it comes to you, just notice, are you feeling a little bit energized? Or is it a calming breath? Or maybe it's a little bit of both. And don't worry if it's not coming to you immediately. But if it does, imagine you have a tool belt on with 3 pockets, an energizing, calming, and an in-between pocket for balancing, or a little bit of both. Just put it in one of those pockets. Let's take the hands again and inhaling them up, exhaling them down to the heart center. Let's do that 2 more times. Inhale, exhale, bring the hands to the heart center. Last one. Inhale, exhale. And just take a moment, if you would like, just looking at your fingertips for a moment. This gesture in yoga, Sanskrit is Anjali Mudra, meaning an offering. Just take a moment and acknowledge the offering that you've given yourself, even in doing this few minutes of practice. This particular way of caring for yourself and being aware of yourself. Acknowledge that you've done that for yourself. We've done that together this morning. Thank you for doing that for yourself.
Thank you, Joanne. That was lovely. It's awakening but calming at the same time. Is there a reason why we did the arm movement at the beginning and at the end?
It's interesting, but the simplicity of moving the arms, unless you have a shoulder injury, for some people that I've worked with, that helps them feel like they're doing yoga because it's a big sweeping, big body movement, and yet it's accessible to most people. And so it's just a nice, it's like writing a story. It's a beginning, a middle, and an end. So it gives a beginning and an end. And I think that it's part of the empowerment of and staking my yoga reputation on, yeah, you were doing yoga if you do that. Because I've had plenty of people sit in front of me going, oh, that's not yoga. No, we've got to do down dog and sun salutes. And I'm like,
they're very young people, obviously.
sometimes. And I see that I've seen that person over the years in many different disguises and have to affirm where they are in their journey. And I'm glad that their body can do those things. But I'm also want to advocate for what we just did was a yoga practice also that used the mind, the body, the spirit, and that's in the vein of caring for yourself, this acceptance of self, and it's a way of loving oneself in a pure and simple form. So I put my stake in the ground of saying, yes, that's what we were doing.
Yeah, and I would even go a step further and say just connecting to self and other is yoga. Yeah, just taking a moment to be fully present and taking a breath and feeling like you did, feeling that right foot and then the left foot, and just being in your body is yoga. Doesn't even need to include movement. But the movement definitely got my physiology into a more awake state.
And it helps people with really busy minds to enter into the practice when they feel unsuccessful, if they go straight into a sitting or meditation practice without the movement. And I've seen that time and time again. Oh, I can't meditate, or I'm a loser at being able to do that. I wasn't successful. When we get still, it's just what busy minds do, is they get busy when you give them an opportunity to be still, and a little bit of movement, even inhaling the hands up and down, and then a little bit more complexity to a breath practice gives the mind something to focus on. In life force yoga, we call that giving the mind a bone, like giving a dog a bone. And it's so true. The mind is, just like that dog, and you give it the bone.
It's excited. That's a good one.
And can be then be in that still and silent place when we think we might not be able to do that, when in fact you can, and you can train yourself to do that, but it takes time and practice to do that.
Again, the practice. Okay, Joanne, thank you so much for all of this. Is there anything you want to share with listeners? Something that you're working on, or things that they could look at, links or articles for services?
I'm hoping to, I'm making a card deck to accompany the book so that
Oh,
there'll be some
great.
visuals and some audio to accompany the practices that I've written
Wow.
in my Australian accent.
It's funny, sometimes I hear you
uh,
slip totally into American.
yes, that's because I've lived here for 30 plus years and people are like,
Wow.
what did you say? I've definitely morphed over time. So my encouragement is to move, connect to your breath and movement every day, in any way, shape, or form. And if you don't already have something that you love to do, walking, riding your bike, just walking up and down stairs. If you uh, the beginning, gentle, slow yoga practice is a really good place to start. And it is for anybody. Don't let anybody tell you it's not for you, because it is.
Hmm.
And I would encourage you to start. I have some free content on YouTube that you can get to from my website, at joannespence.com. But there's lots of content out there, and there's lots of people writing about slow and gentle. Don't start with something fast and difficult. Just do something quiet and slow that's within what you can do. Pain-free range of motion. Connect your breath
Mm.
to movement, and just start it today. Uh, don't leave it till tomorrow. Try something today, even for a few minutes. That's what
Yeah.
I would urge people to try.
Oh, thank you for your wisdom. Beautiful. Yeah. I will put all your links in the show notes. So thank you, listeners. Thank you, everyone, for joining us to the end. Bye, Joanne. Thank you for being here. So, thank you, everyone, for staying to the end of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I really love doing these talks with these amazing people. And if you want to know more, just take a look in the show notes. There's plenty of links and ways to connect with either the guest or myself. If you want to work with us or find out more about us, just check out the information in the show notes. So I hope you have a wonderful weekend or week, and you'll be hearing from me next week. Bye.